Chuck Norris never built his name on controversy, and that's exactly what makes the stories surrounding him so difficult to dismiss without a closer look. His career carries decades of martial arts discipline, military service, and a sustained run in action films that shaped how Hollywood thought about the entire genre. Yet the narratives that keep attaching themselves to him online rarely resemble the man who actually showed up on set every morning with his work already done and no intention of wasting anyone's time. What drove his choices throughout that career wasn't ego or rivalry. It was a personal code, built long before any camera pointed at him. His time in the United States Air Force didn't just provide structure. It rebuilt the way he processed every professional situation that followed. When he moved into martial arts training and eventually into celebrity culture, that foundation came along intact, and it stayed with him through every set he walked onto and every public conversation he sat down for. Understanding it changes everything about how the stories of his so-called conflicts should actually be read, because the dramatic versions that travel fastest on social media were never built from that foundation to begin with. The discipline question deserves real attention, because it shapes nearly every professional decision he ever made publicly and privately. Norris didn't treat it as a trait he could turn on and off depending on who was watching. Preparation mattered to him deeply. Focus on set mattered. Arriving with the work already behind him mattered. A career built through karate competition doesn't produce a person comfortable with shortcuts or willing to blame circumstances for poor results. So when people speculate about professional distance between him and certain figures in the entertainment industry, the honest version of that story traces back to compatibility, not to hatred, and not to long-running grudges maintained quietly in private. Just two different working philosophies sharing the same physical space, and one of them choosing to step back rather than force an unnecessary collision that would serve no real purpose. That gap between compatibility and conflict is exactly where most online storytelling loses the thread entirely. Social media functions on drama, and a figure like Norris, someone connected in the public mind to toughness, patriotism, and faith, becomes a natural fit for that kind of framing. A general comment about values gets clipped away from its context and suddenly reads like a targeted attack on a specific person. The clip moves fast, the interpretation spreads further, and the version that reaches the widest audience is almost never the one that any credible publication could support with a verified source or a confirmed direct quote. It's worth understanding how these narratives gain traction even when the foundation underneath them is weak. Anonymous sources get cited as though they carry full authority. Video clips from decades-old interviews get repackaged with new narration that reframes the original meaning entirely. Comments about general professional values get attached to specific individuals who were never actually mentioned by name. The cycle repeats because each retelling adds another layer of assumed fact, and by the time most people encounter the story, it's traveled so far from its origin that tracing it back requires genuine effort. Norris rarely gave those narratives any oxygen by responding directly, and that silence got read as confirmation by some audiences, which only made the cycle more persistent over time. His actual public statements tell a far quieter story than the version most people have encountered. Across decades of press coverage and television appearances, Norris consistently chose to address ideas rather than individuals. When he spoke about the entertainment industry, he returned to the same principles: discipline, personal responsibility, sustained commitment to craft, and the direct relationship between preparation and whatever results follow from it. He didn't name names when he disagreed with someone's approach to the work. He didn't use interviews as opportunities to settle old scores. For someone whose screen persona was built entirely around confrontation, the real man operated with a level of restraint that most viral versions of his story choose to leave out entirely. The generational friction angle holds more weight when you examine it honestly. Hollywood has always placed people with radically different training histories and personal philosophies in close proximity, and working rhythms rarely align by default. Norris came through karate, through competition, through the kind of training where precision and repetition are the only path to anything worth showing on a professional level. That background shapes everything about how a person approaches a film set, how they handle preparation, how they move through a rehearsal, how much patience they carry for instinct-driven decision-making in the middle of a live take. When he worked alongside performers who preferred improvisation or operated through a looser creative method, the distance that sometimes appeared wasn't personal animosity. It was simply two different professional philosophies, making contact in a confined space, and both of them moving on when the production ended. What those differences became in the retelling is an entirely separate conversation. Friction between working styles picks up a new label when someone packages it into a short online video, and the label is almost always rivalry or feud. A professional preference becomes a personal grudge. That grudge becomes a sustained conflict, and that conflict becomes a list of people someone supposedly could never bring himself to forgive. None of that escalation reflects what actually happened between the people involved. It reflects what earns more attention and keeps the video running longer. The Bruce Lee situation is probably the clearest example of how this pattern operates in practice. Their fight sequence in Way of the Dragon became one of the most studied moments in action cinema, and for decades, audiences read competition into every frame of it. But Norris never treated Lee as a rival outside of that choreography. They trained together. They exchanged real ideas about martial arts philosophy and technique, and both men approached those exchanges with genuine seriousness. Norris has spoken about Lee with consistent admiration across multiple decades of public interviews, crediting Lee's singular contributions to the craft rather than positioning himself against that legacy. The rivalry was a story audiences wrote for those two men, not one either man authored or encouraged during their time together. Cultural and political differences add a layer worth understanding clearly. Norris has been open about his faith, his sense of patriotism, and his belief in individual freedom throughout his entire public career. In an industry as wide as Hollywood, those positions don't always find agreement, and that's genuinely not unusual for anyone working in a creative field. Disagreement doesn't automatically become personal conflict. People can share professional spaces, sometimes share entire productions, and still hold genuinely different views while maintaining real respect for each other's contributions. What consistently disappears from coverage is that Norris addressed these differences the same way he handled everything else, through ideas and principles rather than personal targeting. He stated his positions clearly. He didn't build adversaries in the process. Media framing does real damage to situations that carry genuine nuance, and Norris has been on the receiving end of that damage more than once during a long career. His image, the action star, the martial artist, the figure tied in public memory to toughness and decisive action, makes him a natural fit for conflict-driven storytelling. A quote gets lifted from its surrounding context. An old television interview resurfaces without the rest of that conversation attached to it. The portrait that emerges doesn't resemble the person who actually sat down to give those interviews. His real communication style, measured and consistently aimed at principles over individuals, sits far from the blunt instrument that certain media coverage works hard to suggest he uses. None of this means Norris never encountered difficult personalities or uncomfortable professional situations across a career spanning several decades in the entertainment industry. That kind of career makes friction inevitable at certain points, and claiming otherwise would be its own distortion of the actual record. But his documented response to friction was consistent withdrawal rather than escalation. When a professional relationship reached its natural end, he let it close without carrying it into public view. When a situation felt misaligned, he moved away from it quietly. That pattern of behavior doesn't belong to someone nursing decades of unresolved resentment toward a long list of specific individuals. What actually defines his career holds up clearly when you step back from the noise surrounding it. The discipline built through years of martial arts training and competition, starting well before Hollywood had any interest in him as a performer. The service ethic carried out of the Air Force and never fully put down even when the uniform came off. The consistency he brought across a demanding run in television and action films that lasted longer than most careers in that industry ever managed to sustain. These are the things that built something durable and real. The feuds assigned to him online, the supposed rivalries, the lists of people he allegedly couldn't move past. Those exist almost entirely in the gap between a headline designed to pull attention and a source that could actually support what the headline claims. His legacy belongs to the work, to the principles he returned to consistently across a very long public career, and to the choices he made when nobody was filming or watching. That version of Chuck Norris is harder to package into a short video and doesn't travel nearly as fast as the dramatic alternative. But it's the only version that holds up when someone actually takes the time to sit down and check what's genuinely true against what simply travels well.